made things after just 1 year. Australians around our country are grappling with mounting costs. Your mortgage repayments, gas and electricity bills, supermarket and petrol station receipts, and insurance premiums are the evidence. The number of businesses which have gone into insolvency has almost doubled in a year. And the problem is Labor's inflation. At 7%, it's well and truly above the 2 to 3% target range. International factors feed into inflation, like the war in Ukraine, but the main ingredient is the domestic factors. If domestic inflation wasn't a factor, Australia's inflation would be comparable across like economies, but it's not. At 6.6%, Australia's core inflation, the best measure of inflation, is higher than every G7 nation. Now, the government's taken decisions and they've avoided others, which has made inflation higher than it needs to be. And it often happens when Labor is in power because they simply can't manage money. Labor recklessly spends, they carelessly cut, and they inadequately save. When you hear the government constantly blaming Putin's invasion for inflation, they're being deceptive. Australia's inflation woes are of Labor's own making. Inflation is coming from Canberra. And Labor's big spending budget will only fuel inflation and make life harder for millions of Australians. As soon as they were released from the budget lockup, economist after economist stepped up to the microphone. They warned that Australians were facing, under this big spending budget, a Reserve Bank that had an even harder job. Speaking on the Reserve Bank lifting interest rates, respected economist Chris Richardson said, "I'd thought that the Reserve Bank was done and dusted, but this has notably raised the chance that they will do another swing of the baseball bat." Now, government spending will increase by a staggering $185 billion over 5 years compared to our last budget. The Treasurer's cost of living relief, though, is only temporary. That temporary relief is targeted at Australians on welfare, but at the expense of the many, including Labor's working poor. It's a band-aid now, but much more pain later. And the government spending is only going to fuel the nation's inflation. This budget is a missed opportunity at economic structural reform and building a stronger economy. Mr. Speaker, the Albanese government's Big Australia approach was never mentioned before the election, but it will make the cost of living crisis and inflation worse. Now, we all support a well-planned migration program, and that is the history of the coalition governments. But over 5 years, net overseas migration will see our population increase by 1.5 million people. It's the biggest migration surge in our country's history, and it's occurring at exactly the same time as a housing and rental crisis. Australians are struggling to rent or purchase a property now. The National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation estimates that 138,000 homes will be built in Australia in 2024, falling well short of current demand. And the government's now proposing to bring in almost 6,000 people per week, which will make a very bad situation even worse. Cities, towns and suburbs are already choked with congestion. Yet in this budget, as it did in the last, the government's cutting infrastructure that's already been announced. And it'll take the axe to the Coalition's $120 billion infrastructure pipeline, which was designed to bust congestion. A coalition government will sensibly manage migration, as we've done in the past, in conjunction with proper infrastructure planning. Tonight, I affirm our policy commitment to allow Australians to use their super to buy their first home. A policy which will particularly support young people and separated women later in life. The best way to empower Australians is to make them masters of their fate, and that is through home ownership. And the Coalition is absolutely committed to that principle. Only a coalition can reduce power prices because we have that track record. Under the last 2 years of the coalition government, electricity prices went down by 8% for households. That's a drop of $128 a year. In those 2 years, power costs also went down by 10% for small businesses. Minister Bowen, as we know, was the worst performer in multiple portfolios during the Rudd and Gillard government. As Energy Minister today, his policies are driving your electricity and your gas rise by up to 33% for almost 250,000 small businesses and 1.6 million households. If you think you're paying a lot now, you are only going to pay more under Labor. And they clearly have us on the wrong energy path. Australians deserve a much more honest, more sensible, and frankly less emotional discussion on energy, because energy is crucial to our national success and security. Three weeks ago, I visited Safcol in South Australia. Tonight, in the gallery, is the CEO of Safcol, Mr. Andrew Mitchell. It's an amazing business, founded in 1945. Today, they're one of the biggest manufacturers of baby food in our country. They also produce packaged food like soups and stocks and sauces, which stock our supermarket shelves. Safcol purchases literally millions and millions of dollars of produce from farmers in South Australia and across the country every year. We want businesses like Safcol to grow, to employ more Australians and to export to the world. But in January, Safcol's electricity bill went up by 120%. Prices then go up. And as you know, that's exactly what's happening when you turn up at the supermarket now. Now, if companies shut up shop on our shores and go elsewhere because of Labor's energy crisis, we lose the jobs. We lose the economic benefit to our nation. We lose industries. And there's no benefit to the environment because those emissions, greater emissions, are just emitted in another part of the world. In that scenario, no one wins. So Labor is being deceptive with its energy policy. The scientific reality is that we must firm up the energy grid when renewable energy is unreliable. The latest battery technology installed in Adelaide at a cost of $180 million lasts for 1 hour. So whether you've got 50 or 75 or 100% renewable energy in the system, you still have the fixed cost of firming. To distribute renewable energy, more than $100 billion will need to be spent on 1,000 kilometres the party was at Pink Bats that they just never completed. The poles and wires will run through farming land, through national parks and suburbs. And aside from the huge environmental impact of this rollout, every dollar of that $100 billion that is spent will be passed on to you in the form of higher electricity bills. We want to see emissions go down. We support renewable energy, but indeed between 2013 and 2021, the Coalition cut Australia's emissions by 17%, while growing the economy and creating jobs. Next generation small modular nuclear technologies are safe, reliable, cost-effective, can be plugged into existing grids where we've turned off coal and emit zero emissions. In the 21st century, any sensible government must at least consider small modular nuclear as part of the energy mix. 32 countries, including Canada, China, France, the United States and the United Kingdom, use zero-emission nuclear power today, including to firm up renewables. 50 countries are exploring or investing in next-generation nuclear technology. And oddly, Labor is happy for similar technologies to power our future submarines. The submarines can tie up at docks in our capital cities with the nuclear technology and the nuclear propulsion systems, but you can't, under Labor's policy, have any consideration of powering that city with zero emissions using the same technology. It refuses to consider the benefits of onshore small and micro modular reactors. With the government against coal and nuclear, gas remains the only viable firming power today. And yet Labor wants gas gone too. It's undermining gas at every turn, and that's why your gas prices continue to go up. There are interventions in the market with price fixing, by funding activists to wage lawfare against new gas supply ventures, in introducing a new carbon tax 3 times more than Julia Gillard's, in pushing to electrify homes and businesses despite the exorbitant cost for families, and by increasing taxes on offshore gas and oil projects in this budget. Your household is paying for all of this. Paying for all of it and so much more to come. A coalition will get more gas into the domestic system because we know that that will work. More supply into the system where there is demand will reduce prices. On the eve of Easter, Labor axed the former coalition's low and middle income tax offset. Around 10 million Australians earning $126,000 or less will now be up to $1,500 worse off. Now, Labor has abandoned the coalition's tax cap of 23.9%, and we believe that the tax cap should be restored. Compared to our last budget, over the next 5 years, the tax paid by Australians will increase by more than $300 billion. In this budget, Labor has slugged our farmers with a new $153 million tax. They will be forced to unfairly pay for the risks of international importers, especially at a time when our farmers and producers are facing more uncertainty with rising input costs and workforce shortages. This tax will just simply be passed on by the farmers to consumers. It just means that there will be higher prices at the supermarket. And instead of taxing Australian farmers, tonight I announce the Coalition will establish an importer container levy as recommended by the independent review. Under a coalition government, Australian farmers will not be punished for the biosecurity risk others pose by importing their products. Labor has been silent on its promise to keep stage 3 of the Coalition's legislated tax plan in full. Our tax cuts will see 95% of Australian workers keep at least 70 cents in every dollar they earn. Now, with about 400 days before the tax cuts take effect, believe me, there is time for Labor to break another promise. In this budget, Labor has doubled the tax on Australians who have worked hard, sacrificed and saved to invest in their super. This move will affect millions of Australians over coming years, including more than 2 million Australians under the age of 25, earning the average wage during their life. This government thinks that your super is their money. Now, this tax is an attack on Australians who have worked hard and saved to support themselves and their families. It undermines the fundamentals of our tax system in taxing unrealised capital gains. Now, just imagine for a second your small business, your farm or another asset will support your retirement, but under Labor, you'll pay tax on those things before you sell them, impacting your cash flow. Now, to those who have welcomed this tax, a word of caution. Being spared by the Labor tax shark today doesn't mean you won't be on its menu tomorrow. If Labor can't keep its promises to leave your super alone, any super tax cap will not be set in stone. And we know that taxation is the killer of aspiration. The working individual supports themselves, their family, their community, fellow Australians and our great country. People should be rewarded for their hard work by keeping more of what they earn so they don't become the new working poor. The more you keep from what you earn, the less you're dependent on the state. And the more freedom and choice you have to realise your aspirations. And it might be studying, it might be travelling, it might be educating your children or your grandchildren, it might be starting a business, it might be owning a home or renting comfortably. Your money is your money, not the government's. And under a coalition government I lead, your taxes will always be lower. Good government prioritises the health of all Australians. As Health Minister, I increased GP training places by 25% to improve access to the family doctor, and I established the $20 billion Medical Research Future Fund. To date, 903 research projects have been funded into Alzheimer's and many other diseases. During the Coalition's 9 years in government, we listed more than 2,900 new and amended medicines worth $16.5 billion on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. We support the government's decision in this budget to fund new medicines and general practice. But there are many areas, two in particular, which Labor are not prioritising. The first is mental health. The Coalition increased the number of Medicare subsidised psychological sessions from 10 to 20. Labor dropped it back to 10 sessions for no reason. We will restore the 20 sessions and subsidise them on a permanent basis because that's what people need to get better. I want an Australia where we support Australians who are unwell, not an Australia where we leave those people behind. And this is crucial in the area of mental health, but secondly, in the area of women's health. The Coalition has a proud record committing funding for endometriosis, stillbirths, breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Tonight I confirm our commitment of investing $4 million to Ovarian Cancer Australia after they've been forgotten, not just in October's budget, but in this budget as well. In addition, I announced the Coalition Government will allocate $5 million to review women-specific health items on the Medicare benefits schedule and the corresponding treatments on the PBS. The review will identify what best practice women-specific medical services are not listed and ensure clinically effective services and treatments are affordable and accessible for conditions such as endometriotic ovary syndrome. It's about determining where additional funding is required to better support women's health and wellbeing. Better access to quality care for women-specific pain conditions will improve the life, the quality of life of many women, and economic and social participation for hundreds of government. So too will community safety. We will again fund the highly successful Safer Communities Fund. This program supported at-risk communities across the nation and assisted multicultural communities to protect places of worship. As a police officer, I attended my first domestic violence incident when I was 19 years of age, and countless others over my decade-long career. From that time, I committed myself to protecting women and children from violence. As Home Affairs Minister, I funded and opened the $70 million Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, which has removed more than 500 children from harm. Tonight I announce that a coalition government will industrialise our law enforcement and intelligence strike capabilities against sexual predators online in our communities. We will double the size of the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation. I use this opportunity tonight to again call on the Prime Minister to hold a Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in Indigenous communities. Those children who seek to have it, so that welfare payments can be spent on food and kids, not alcohol and drugs. Its removal by this government has led to increasing violence, as we know, within many Indigenous communities.